He gives this idea that there are two subsects of people. There are people that are drifters and people that are not. And it's a 98 to 2 ratio. So for every 100 people, 98 of them are these drifters. And the devil sort of gives this presentation that the people that are drifting, they lack definitive purpose. I think AI's come up on every single time we've talked, but I agree with you that the sort of sycophantic nature of AI, and then with the loss of the third space, where people aren't going to church like they used to. We're not going to the gym like we used to. I mean, you and I have discussed just this week. Yeah, just this week I've hurt my knee and I haven't been going to the gym and I'm like losing my mind.
So are you saying that we should add
But
AI as one of the primary fears now?
it could be. But what I'm saying is we should definitely be when does it become that we are the sum of the five people around us that we spend the most time with, and that all five people are Claude
Yeah.
and Gronk and ChatGPT and Gemini
Yeah.
and Llama and all of these AIs, which are just going to tell us that we are the smartest people in the world and like we have all these great ideas.
You want to hear something?
I fear
I
that
saw I
future.
saw
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fitness, Fables, and Fatherhood. I'm here with Eric, the Modern Viking, and today we will be reviewing the book Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. Eric, this was one of my choices on last month's wheel. I kind of have a bit of a system for the wheel, although it today doesn't fit, where I have a nonfiction, fiction, and then like sort of a self-help book on there. This book in particular has a bit of an interesting history. Before we get into that though, what were your like initial thoughts?
Yeah, so Outwitting the Devil is Napoleon Hill's exploration of how people surrender control of their lives through fear and distraction and the absence of clear purpose. And it's kind of interesting because he frames this as like this imaginary interrogation. It's kind of a Socratic back and forth with the devil. So a very different style of book than I have read in a long time. It really looks at like he has this concept of drifting, and how people are living reactively instead of intentionally, to be able to kind of juxtapose against that framework. So really interesting for its time. I feel like this was written pre-war. I think you kind of know a little bit the
Yeah.
background on it, but definitely an interesting read. I like this.
Yeah, so it was written in 1938. So a bit of a history on Napoleon Hill, which I will preface, a lot of this is allegedly and isn't necessarily like proven out. There's a lot of different people with different opinions on Napoleon Hill. I was surprised you hadn't heard of him. So Napoleon Hill was born in, I believe, the like 1880, somewhere in there, died in the 1970s. And he got famous writing the book Think and Grow Rich, which is one of the sort of predominant self-help businessy books, sort of the original self-made guru type. But Think and Grow Rich is an interview with Andrew Carnegie, so one of the richest people of his time. Again, the book being written in 1938. Think and Grow Rich was written in 1937 by Napoleon Hill. And there is a lot of theories, there's a lot of thoughts out there, including the biographer of Napoleon Hill himself, that there's doubt he ever actually met Andrew Carnegie and actually had this interview, because Napoleon Hill by trade was sort of a journalist, sort of a salesman, kind of bounced around quite a bit. It was also said that he met with President Wilson, President FDR, and he turned down a job with President Wilson, which again, there's quite a bit of conspiracy theories that never happened, especially since, from all intents and purposes, Napoleon Hill was relatively broke at the time that he was offered this job. And there are some writings by Andrew Carnegie that directly conflict with the things that Napoleon Hill said that Andrew Carnegie told him. And he quoted Andrew Carnegie as saying in his book, Think and Grow Rich. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting history around Napoleon Hill and his life, which some of it is brought to the fore in the first two chapters of this book. So if you remember both of us listened to this, but at the very beginning it's sort of like an autobiographical day in the life of Napoleon Hill prior to the interview with the devil, which gives some field of view from how he is approaching this. But yeah, so he wrote this in 1930, but it wasn't released until 2011, having been sort of put into a vault as his family didn't want it published. I didn't want it given to the masses, seeing the role that the devil played in this piece of, whether you take it as nonfiction when he actually interviewed the devil, or if it's more of a fictional representation of his messaging. His wife and then his family thereafter didn't want it released until they were gone. So I believe and again, this I'm a little iffy on, but I believe his nephew passed away in 2011, and then it was finally released and published. My initial comings to with Napoleon Hill, or my introduction to him, was actually through something called the Master Key Society. He wrote another book that talked about like this master key and how you can sort of be a self-made man. And on YouTube, this group exists, and they sort of go through old literature and read it. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And that was my first introduction. I actually haven't read the Think and Grow Rich, even though it is sort of a premier work when it comes to sort of the self-help genre.
I was going to say, I had heard of that book before. I guess I didn't realize that was by Napoleon Hill. I didn't read it, kind of acknowledge that.
Yeah. So he wrote that book, and that is sort of what popularized him in sort of the mainstream and has kept him relevant all these years later.
In some of his themes, like, for being written that long ago, I was really kind of pleasantly surprised that a lot of the themes that we're talking about in this book are things that are maybe even more relevant today. Like when he talks about hypnotic rhythm, and we'll get into that, but just these things that like I can see being translated into our everyday of doom scrolling and everything else. So
yeah, definitely. And I thought that the presentation of the book, the formatting with this sort of interview back and forth style was rather interesting, even though we both listened to the book. So the prose, a little difficult to sort of rate. And I believe you listened to the same version that I did, the annotated version. Yeah, so I think the presentation of this book, it was annotated by a woman, Sharon Lecter, and she sort of interspersed some modern equivalencies to some of his main themes, which I thought were good.
Sometimes at first, when I first heard them, like she would like restate what they had just said, and I found it a little redundant, and I kind of didn't like the butting in. Like, and it was interesting too, because I mean, again, this was released in like 2011, and it's crazy to think how far we've come in just these last 14 years or so, last 10 years, whatever. So even though it's more of a modern book, it still definitely felt like it was kind of old by this point, or some of her interpretations. But
yeah, and it's an old book too.
Yeah. It just, so I don't know, even when I first started, I think because it was the back and forth with the interjections, like that cadence didn't really work for me initially. I was a little bit put off by that. I struggled to kind of get through this whole facade of like, he's talking to the devil, right? And it just felt a little fake. But the more he got into it, actually, the more he drew me in, just because of the content and the themes that he started to reveal.
Yeah, and he is sort of known as the father of The Secret, which is sort of the modern version of his theories and principles. So whether you were a fan of the book The Secret, which I know my grandmother was, or a fan of, I believe there was a movie at some point in time, which I never saw, but the main sort of concept of his principles is sort of self-actualization and self-manifestation, which we'll get into a little bit. But I agree with you, especially those first two chapters where it's more of the autobiographical workings of a day-to-day moving through for Napoleon Hill. I didn't find her interjections all that useful or necessary. She would sort of interject like, this is why I'm telling you this. This is a bit of history and lore regarding Napoleon Hill. And really the true meat of the book with the interview with the actual devil doesn't occur until chapter, I believe, 3, or almost 2 hours into the audio. So what were your thoughts regarding sort of the style of the book and this sort of novel approach to presenting his ideas?
I think, like, I was thinking about this, and some of the content that he's talking about, I think, are some things that, especially back in that time too, are maybe a little faux pas to just come out so bluntly to be able to make critiques on some of these different topics. So, like, I actually kind of appreciated his ability to have a little fun with this and to be able to put it onto this otherworldly figure as the bad guy, to kind of juxtapose, like, all of these thoughts. But in a way, it sometimes felt a little preachy. It sometimes asserted it, like, some of his philosophical thoughts, like, pretty bluntly. So, like, there may be, like, certain areas where I may have had just a little bit of a rub in terms of, like, how it came across or presented. But, like, in general, I do feel like there were some universal pieces that he kind of got to. And so I appreciated his ability to kind of take it into that, I'll call it the fictional realm, right? To be able to explore some of these different ideas for the time. So maybe because of the religious lens, that could turn some people off. And I think he comments, right, too, on religion. So, I mean, that could be, you could take that maybe the wrong way. So it could kind of alienate some readers. But no, I think as soon as I got into the interview and I was able to accept kind of the format, then I really was immersed within it and could start to play around with the ideas that he's bringing. So I kind of like that Socratic method that he's going back and forth with the devil and really trying to tease out, like, these details. Very different, just kind of strange, but, like, if you can get past that little bit of awkwardness, I think that, ultimately, like, I enjoyed it. How about you?
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting presentation, as I said before, and it's quick. It was a quick read.
What,
I mean,
5 hours?
6 hours. Yeah, 6 hours on audiobook, I believe, and that's with a forward and the annotations. So, I mean, it's worth picking up, I guess, and browsing. I mean, maybe you get the non-annotated versions. It'd be even shorter, which I did find on Hoopla. Little plug to the library app there, which I love to try to find audiobooks on. But yeah, I thought it was an interesting sort of novel stylistic choice to do. And now, to kind of piggyback on that, do you think he actually talked to the devil?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, but I can appreciate
Yeah.
the intrigue and the kind of little bit of mysticism around it. It reminded me of that song, "The Devil Went Down to Georgia."
Yeah. So allegedly, he never spoke to Andrew Carnegie, and now allegedly he's never spoken to the devil either. So take that with what you will. Maybe these are works of complete fiction. So anyone that's interested in, like, spoilers after we've given the brief overview, I would tune out now as we get into more of the actual, like, potatoes and meat of the story, or the meat of the book itself. So you've kind of already hinted at a few things with the hypnotic rhythm and with the drifting and definitive purpose sort of themes here. When he presents the devil and he's sort of going back and forth, he asks the devil about people here on earth and sort of what separates them. And he gives this idea that there are two subsects of people. There are people that are drifters and people that are not. And it's a 98-2 ratio. So for every 100 people, 98 of them are these drifters. And the devil sort of gives this presentation that the people that are drifting, they lack definitive purpose. Did you have any commentary on that, as I got a pop up on my screen here?
Interesting, because I think, what he's trying to do is he's trying to give you something to hit off from, right? To be able to say, I want, like, from a self-help perspective, it's something to hit off from, to be able to clearly identify it. It's a concrete example where you can say, "Ooh, I don't want to be like that. Let's listen and learn and gain all these, insights from this guru." So as the drifter is someone who's passive, no goals, no discipline, no clear values. Like, I can clearly get on board with that idea of trying to better oneself and think about, well, then how does that show up in my life and how can I be more intentional, right? So, like, some of those things I really do ascribe to. And I think that like there is a difference, and I will agree with him that like there's a difference between acting reactively to the world and being able to say to yourself, I'm going to be proactive and I'm going to, kind of create my life. I'm going to influence the way that I see the world so that, any challenge that I come across is an opportunity to be able to, better myself. So I like that he's playing with some of that. The part that I have a little bit of a tough time with is, as you said, if you're looking at the world, then if you believe this as 98% of the people are drifters and only 2% may be intentional, it kind of then positions you as a us versus them mentality. And I feel like it tends to maybe polarize you against how you screen and look at others within your life and around you, at work, your friends, your situation. And I feel like that could have a detrimental effect. So that was the only thing that I kind of like. I liked it in some ways so that it was a concrete example, but I would caution against really fully accepting that model for the world and trying to overlay it on others if you're going to make a moral judgment on others. But if you're just taking accountability for yourself, I thought it was an effective way to be able to kind of position that.
Yeah, and he needs sort of an anti-hero. He needs an antagonist for the reader, because the devil in the book really doesn't, he's not an actor. Like, as he's discussing things with supposedly Napoleon Hill, he discusses how he uses other things to do his work. It's not the main goal of the devil to intervene. It's the antagonist is more institutions. It's these drifters and the natural world that we like to fall into. And it also gives him a sort of anchor point for the rest of his theories and the rest of his sort of mantras and actionable points for what you can do. Because as he lays out these drifters, he's saying, well, you don't want to be a drifter. But as you just said, I mean, in 2025, as we sort of lose our third spaces, we lose our like communities, and we have these attacks that he portrays later, which we'll discuss, on institutions and sort of their roles in creating sort of a passive individual. What does that mean for community, and what can we do to create these third spaces that manifest more action in a person and more self mastery and self achievement? But yeah, so I think that the drifter versus the non-drifter is sort of the anchoring idea behind everything else that he says.
And one of the other pieces that I guess I appreciated, like as he framed it as, the devil, right? He is essentially saying, the devil saying like, he doesn't need to capture people, right? He just needs to keep them unfocused. And that like is a palpable fear, a motivating fear to kind of look at yourself and say, gosh, like how am I acting in my day-to-day life? So I think that has some gravitas, because then it's not something that you can, if you would have positioned it a different way, if it wouldn't have been the devil, and if you would have just been talking about particular morals, it might not have been as effective. Because I think that you can kind of look at your life, and I think you can kind of see that as a palpable nature, right? Like this is something that you can see in your everyday life. So I do think that was, effective.
Yeah, and as you say, fear, I mean, that was a big theme in the book in general. He had his 6 different fears that people were going through their lives sort of drifting here and there, trying to avoid rather than sort of taking action. It was more sort of these fear-driven behaviors to try to avoid certain things, which we can talk about in a bit, because that directly relates to his theory of the hypnotic pattern. Which, like, in your understanding, how would you describe that, or what would your definition of this hypnotic pattern be to like a reader now after reading the book once?
So I mean, he's talking about like establishing habits, good and bad habits, and so like as someone who I've taken psychology courses, I've read a number of books on habit building. As someone who's a personal trainer, like that is something that cognitive behavioral therapy is something that I've really ascribed to be able to make changes in one's life. So that actually really resonated with me, this hypnotic rhythm. of, it's your day-to-day actions that then once they're set, those behaviors repeat themselves throughout life. And he even kind of mentions the fact that like um, influencing parents versus children, right? And kind of the idea that like,
Hmm.
if he can get them young and kind of, establish those habits early in life, like it locks you in. And so that's something that I think I actually felt was really effective when you're talking about like the habits and the triggers for those different types of habits. And either the fear, the motivating factor is either the fear or the he kind of describes it as the opposites, right? Like the things that you would, now my brain is pausing on me, but the things that you attract, and then
Yeah,
it's the opposite, right? That your avoidance, right?
right. He's talking about like establishing, yeah, specific
Yeah.
thoughts and habits and sort of the
Mm-hmm.
self-actualization, going back to sort of the
Yep.
secret, that if you whatever consistent thoughts and actions you put out into the world, you're going to sort of re gain the awards of like twofold coming back to you. So if you, I mean, he mentions some things. He mentions
Mm-hmm.
like alcohol and how alcohol turns people into dullards. It sort of dulls the mind. And he says smoking and its ill effects. And this is, I mean, that's a pretty radical idea given this being written in
Yeah.
1938. Sort of, I mean, alcohol with prohibition and whatnot, but cigarettes, I mean, you had
Yeah.
physicians like actively recommending cigarette smoke at the time for certain things. So, I mean, that was a pretty radical idea that smoking was bad for you. But he also talked about some other things, like even bad
Mm-hmm.
diet, like he mentioned and talked about. But as you were saying, the hypnotic sort of rhythm being consistent with positive actions and thoughts, and he sort of ties that into sort of the definitive purpose or definite purpose, somebody's self mastery, to learn from adversity. That like failure, if you take it as that and you let it act upon you as a negative, then consistently over time, you're going to learn that to avoid failure, that you shouldn't be seeking it. But he wants you to sort of frame that as a consistent learning opportunity. And he talks about caution and being consistently thoughtful with your actions, but also making sure that you take action. So he's trying to establish these consistent patterns in your day-to-day thought processes in either the positive or the negative, but he wants you obviously to take the positive
Yeah,
side
and
of
how
things.
like those negative feedback loops really actually work to enslave you. That like, yeah, like you were kind of saying, you
Mhm.
have the negative thought, you have the fear, you procrastinate, right? And then conformity becomes like that self-reforming, like reinforcing kind of loop, right? So it's kind of the
Mhm.
thought that that you can break that cycle, but you got to be intentional about that.
Yeah, and he uses the words like mastermind and like that. I think was one of the original sort of uses of that term, and now you see that used all the time with small groups of individuals coming together to discuss things. And that's also a way to sort of provide this positive hypnotic rhythm where you're exposing yourself to positive things externally as well. But I mean, we've discussed a few times now, so we might as well move on to that part. But a big tool that he talks about on the devil's side is fear. And I think that directly ties back into the hypnotic rhythm, because those thoughts and habits that we create are directly related to these sort of six fundamental fears that he talks about the devil using to influence a person. And those six were the fear of poverty, fear of criticism, fear of ill health, fear of loss of love. I'll check my paper. Fear of old age and fear of death, I think, were the six.
Kind of
So,
interesting that like a number of them are all like physical, corporeal kind of fears,
mhm,
right? Death, old age, the ill health, and even poverty to that extreme like sense is like a threat to your physical well-being. So of all the six, like I kind of looked at those and I said, okay, I get that. Like that makes sense. Like if your basal needs are not taken care of, and if you're thinking about have that in your head, but on the flip side, then the only other two that are kind of maybe more emotional or tied to the ego, right, would be the criticism and the loss of love, right?
mhm.
So I thought that was kind of interesting, like from those six primary fears. Did you feel like that was a good representation, or did you feel like if you were writing it or reading it today, do you feel like others might be, you would have framed that maybe differently?
I think they remain relatively true. I mean, with our day to day actions, anything that you do, you find yourself sort of referencing these things. I mean, you and I have discussed it many times. Like, whenever I've thought about changing careers, and it's what does my mental thought process always come back to? It's, will I be able to make an equivalent income? Will I be able to sort of provide for myself and my family in a way that will maintain our current level of health? Because unfortunately, access to healthcare can be a thing, and that can be negatively affected by decisions that we make. Even the food that we consume, it can be. So looking at some of those fears, I definitely can see those affecting decision making. And his whole premise is that you should not be afraid of these things and should take more of a stoic approach. And I did find a lot of parallels to sort of the small s stoicism, philosophical ideas, where you control what you think about a situation, and that should be where you put your focus, as you can't necessarily control the things around you. But even, I mean, in work meetings, etc., somebody would ask, does anyone have any comments? And sometimes you think, should I raise my hand? Should I say anything? What are others going to think? So I do think all of these are still very much applicable and very much relevant to 2025. Did you think the same, or do you have a different
I thought it was just interesting that it was all balanced like towards those corporeal, and I kind of was trying to think like what other ones might be more, like aspirational, like in the opposites of those. But I don't know, like I think about status, right? Like as a later. So like I guess that maybe is covered by maybe poverty or criticism. Like there are elements there, but like I think there might be some other slices that might hit for different people. So I just, if I were reading it, if it were being redone for today, I'm just kind of curious if there might be some slight changes there that may make it.
Yeah, I think I included like status in with the fear of criticism, where someone would not want to reach the next level of status because it would expose them to more readily available criticism from the individuals, not only around them, but also that they're directly responsible for, sort of in a modern sort of hierarchical business structure. So I think it was a good capture. You could definitely break it down more, I think, and maybe even eliminate a few of them from like the perspective of the fear of old age and the fear of death sort of being combined into one. But
like the ill health, like I get it, right? Because it is kind of different, a different type of fear. But yeah, so just some of those kind of felt like, okay, you could probably throw them together.
Yeah, and this was written a long time ago, so we like the healthcare system was definitely different in 1938 compared to now. But definitely, I think it gave us some good coverage. Talking about those fears and the hypnotic pattern, hypnotic rhythm, and this idea of a drifter, given sort of a modern perspective, like, do you think the book had useful messaging for like a modern reader? Or do you feel like it's a bunch of fluff that just goes without saying?
Is I think you've kind of mentioned in the past, like the U.S. ever more becoming an economy based on like attention, right? And like to that effect, I think this is hugely important as you think about like the social media algorithms that essentially push you into a particular bubble. So the more that you say something, right, AI is going to kind of hear it, think it wants to commercialize that kind of stuff, and pushes it back towards you, right? And it is becoming so commonplace now. If I say anything around my phone, then I'm getting inundated with all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of crazy to think how that self-talk. He talks about this, right, and how it comes back to you. Well, it's literally coming back to us in this respect. And so, if you are talking about things with a language today that is negative, if you're talking about your woes and your fears, and I hate to even say it next to myself, but like, concerned about like poverty and like, oh, woe is me, right? Like it's going to market stuff towards you that is serving that kind of stuff, right? So like being aware of how you think and how you talk and how you act, I think is becoming ever more important. And this to me, I actually thought really kind of starts to hit the nail on the head, and it actually made me wish that there was kind of like a modern version of it to really like start to think about like where does that show up in my life. And
Mhm.
how do you get intentional about it so that you don't just sink into the doom scrolling and become a victim of like this passive life, right?
Yeah. Well, and not only what you think and what you say, but also
Yeah.
what you search. I mean, with the internet in modern times, I mean, your search history and your activity on social media just puts you into these echo chambers and these predominantly negative sort of visuals constantly. And as someone who is constantly exposed to these stories because negativity gets more clicks, what can we do and what should we be doing um, to sort of protect ourselves from this? And he talks about sort of the self mastery and the hypnotic rhythm where we should be practicing positive self talk and have positive exposures with the people around you. The whole saying, you are the sum of the five people that you spend the most time around, right?
How much of that time is
And
chat GPT? I know for you maybe not as
exactly, how
much. I
much of
know
that
you're
time?
averting to, but like, but that's kind of crazy to think that like now those systems are really learning you over time and they're getting crafted better and better towards you. And when you think about like, well, what is the thing that I could do? In some ways, if you want to work with the AI, I think to myself, okay, maybe I can be more intentional about prompting it to say, don't take all these things straight on. Be a critic of yourself and myself, and let's play the devil's advocate, and let's think through these things along the spectrum, right? Let's not just don't just placate me, don't just say yes, you're amazing, Eric, and continue to put me into a deeper and deeper bubble, right, onto one side or another.
Yeah.
So
Well, and I mean, this has become a theme now. I think AI has come up on every single time we've talked. But I agree with you that the sort of sycophantic nature of AI, and then with the loss of the third space, where people aren't going to church like they used to. We're not going to the gym like we used to. I mean, you and I have discussed just this week. Yeah, just this week, I've hurt my knee, and I haven't been going to the gym, and I'm like losing my mind.
so are you saying that we should add
But
AI as one of the primary fears now?
it could be, but what I'm saying is we should
Oh
definitely
man.
be we when does it become that the we are the sum of the five people around us that we spend the most time with, and that all five people are Claude
Yeah.
and Gronk and ChatGPT and Gemini
Yeah.
and Llama and all of these AIs which are just going to tell us that we are the smartest people in the world and like we have all these great ideas.
You want to hear
I'm
something?
I fear
I
that
saw I
future.
saw something on like what was it? Is his name Jason Gordon Levitt? Is that the guy? He like went and
Mhm.
he talked to, I don't know if it was the UN or something like that, and he was talking about like cautionary tales around AI. And of course, since I liked it, then I get flooded with a whole bunch of his content that comes my way. But it was interesting because he had this little bit about like Christmas presents and how there's a ton of these toys now that are like AI toys that are designed for kids, and the whole point of them is to get engagement. So essentially it's exactly what we're
Mhm.
talking about right here, which is training kids from the very beginning to engage, but maybe not have those human interactions. And it's really crazy to think about like how that's going to shape our future. Right? Yikes.
Yeah, and I mean the exposure to
Yeah.
information is going to fundamentally change. And with these patterns that he's talking about, these rhythms, like with an attention economy, do most of the things we expose ourselves, are they going to be negative things? I mean, I log on to my phone and I'm bombarded with just negativity and news stories from around the world that are horrible. Just war and I mean things that we should
Yeah.
know about, but it doesn't need to be there always. And having a practice kind of putting into your hypnotic rhythm some form of practice of sort of the analog and getting away from some of this stuff, I think is probably a
Mhm.
good idea. Given those third spaces, he has some pretty harsh commentary on institutions. Specifically, he talks about the church and schools. And the annotator, Miss or Mrs. Lecter, Sharon, she sort of pushes that forward to at least 2011 as well, where schools and the sort of more religious institution may be leaving something lacking. Did you have any specific thoughts regarding sort of his commentary on institutions in general, or those two in particular?
He paints some like concrete cases against those, like you said, but like I think one important nuance is that I don't feel like he's anti-institutional, but he's anti-unexamined like awareness, right? Like it's again just about that awareness. So I know like for the educational component, he talks about rewarding conformity over like curiosity. And so yeah, I mean we're still teaching to standardized tests. I mean that kind of seems a little crazy to me in this day and age. And like I kind of worry about that for my kids, because like you said, there are some components of AI that I do think are going to be beneficial, that are going to help move society in the right way. It can only be done if we're doing it in a thoughtful method. And I think we have to go slow into that, although I don't know that we can because of the speed at which we're accelerating. So I really think it's going to be a tumultuous few years. I think that we're already seeing the effects of that as we're seeing employment rates drop, and a lot of people are looking at ROI and just trying to reduce where they can. So it's kind of a race to the bottom, instead of maybe thinking about like, what's the whole reason of having it, right? It's to better our lives. So yeah, I do think that's pushing this big divide. And you kind of hear about this in terms of, this was years ago, the 1%, and now we've got the same kind of dynamics happening, only in larger scales too.
Yeah, in high school, you and I went through the like Wall Street versus the 1% protests that happened. I think we were in maybe 11th grade or something at the time. But yeah, his discussion on the institutions is predominantly, as you said, not necessarily anti-institution, but anti-critical thought. Like he made a lot of commentary about how both the church, through faith-based sort of education, like you don't have to critically think because you just blindly accept like a sort of dogma that was presented to you, given from the church, but also in schools, rather than critically thinking over a problem, you are rote memorizing the different names of rivers in South America. And his argumentation was that we should be focusing more on critical thought, more on the ability to dissect an argument and be able to get into more debate and be critical thinkers rather than sort of followers and memorizers. So I feel like that's probably still pretty relevant now, at least given our not undergraduate, but our primary school sort of education. I mean, going back to history class and whatnot, yes, we did think about like in advanced government. I remember writing a paper on like the rise of Irish nationalism, and that required a lot of research and critical thinking. But then in another class, I was literally coloring in maps and labeling them. So as a 17, 18-year-old human.
Can you remember where those countries are located?
Yeah. And isn't that what AI is for? At this point, I'd much rather critically reason and think over a problem and be creative with my thought processes and break down something. I'll use AI to look up the name of some random historical figure that I don't remember. That seems like a great use. Just like calculators are a
kind
thing.
Of crazy when you think about like how much of a person's identity, especially in the past, like, is really tied up with either like your title or role for your work, right? I'm smart because I have memorized all these amazing things in each area, right? Now that's kind of kaput, right? In a couple of years, even those niche things are going to be commonplace accessible, and you don't even need to think about it. And what does that do for that person? I mean, who has built up their whole career, done a PhD in this particular one niche topic? and now their value
Yeah.
as a human being, if they believe that, right? And I think a
Yeah.
lot of people do, is tied into those types of values of the role, but also like roles in work, but also like roles in, this is fitness, fables, and fatherhood, right? So like your role as a father or as a mother, right? Those like roles within your family, and what does that really mean? Is as you are trying to bestow your wisdom or your values onto your kids, and yet by the time that your kids can read or write or even just talk to their cell phone now, right? Like, are they gonna like what is that family dynamic gonna look like too when your kids are almost smarter than you because now they're having an interaction with AI that knows how to, educate extremely
Yeah.
well. They're coming out with educational models. And so that's great in some respects. And yet, like, it's not this bad, but it's going to change the dynamics within families, within work, within relationship of how you interact. So I don't know really what to think about that or how to, like, kind of get ahead of that, right?
Yeah. Well, and the commentary on like one's self-worth and value. Little plug for our last discussion about the book. I don't want to talk about it. Terrence Real kind of talks about that quite a bit. Yeah, I mean, are we going to lose the capacity for nuance too?
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, if AI is teaching our kids and our kids come to us, well, this is what AI says. Does that lack sort of the nuance and any sort of emotional value, and how much weight do we put on that? But yeah, we need to add an
Yeah,
AI
I
book,
think
I
so too.
think, onto one of our lists, just because this keeps coming up. But yeah, I think these sort of consistent changes in technology now in our current day, they're happening so
Mhm.
fast that it makes it hard to really know what the future is
Well,
going to look like.
when you think about, okay, I'm gonna blow this up. This is gonna turn into something even bigger, but I'm gonna say it anyway. When you think about someone being right, right? You can
Hmm.
look at something, I can look at it. We can be looking at the same thing, and yet you're gonna see it as a square. I might see it as a circle. And there's actually an art installation. It's called Circling the Square, and I'll have to send it to you. But it's an actual object in three-dimensional space, and from one position you can
Hmm.
see it, right, and the illusion that as you walk around it, then you can see it the other way. So like in a lot of ways, as I see this polarization in politics and everything else, it really makes me wonder, like, how do you circumnavigate that? How do you bring everything into focus for people? And to me, it's more about like
Hmm.
you have to describe the object objectively and be able to then appreciate the subjective nature of the other person's perception. And so in some ways, even though
Yeah.
I see this having AI like having a potential to steer people towards seeing one particular perspective, that maybe over time like there will be a movement to be able to make sure that there is a process in place to validate the multitude of different perspectives that can look at any one thing. And so then when you go, well, what's right? Like, should I talk about the thing as a circle or a square? You might have to acknowledge that it doesn't have to be binary, right? And it changes the concept of
Well, and
progress.
yeah, is that a distinct attribute of being human, like our ability to sort of step outside of
Mhm.
ourselves and consider
Yeah.
another perspective? And I think he talks about the sort of drifter and the loss of
Yeah.
critical thought being like an issue. Um, and as you were just saying, is it going to be something that AI takes us into a more binary yes or no? And then does it fall on us as parents and as like humans to be able to take that and step back and say this isn't binary, and we step outside of our own personal experiences to be able to have a more nuanced
Mhm.
conversation? Yeah, like I said, we'll need to add an AI book. But as far as like your overall sort of experience with Outwitting the Devil and Napoleon Hill's writing style, what were your sort of final thoughts and recommendations, and what would you
Yeah.
rate the book?
So Outwitting the Devil, I think it's not about defeating evil. It's about refusing to live unconsciously. I think that his real wording isn't about like damnation. It's about this concept of drift. And so I think it's hugely relevant. I think it needs to be updated. and talked about even more in different perspectives. So it was a fun read. I actually really appreciated that it was a quick read.
Hmm.
I like audiobooks in general. This one was a little more like there was a little more dramatization, right, of the reading or telling of it. So it was maybe a little more engaging. This one actually kept my attention, and so
Hmm.
I'd give it. What are we doing? Stars? 5 stars? 10 out of 10?
Out of 10.
Okay, so yeah, I'd give it like a 9. I thought it was pretty good, 8 or 9. There's probably some critiques, but like I was pleasantly surprised. Maybe it's because I've had a couple that I've rated kind of low, so I was happy to see one that
Yeah.
was kind of fun.
Yeah, this is our third discussion on the book, and that's
Yeah,
your highest rating. So yeah, from a themes perspective, I think it's still useful. I think there are more modern representations given The Secret being out. I do kind of get annoyed at it being sort of the handbook for the modern sort of guru, where a lot of what's in the book has been sort of repackaged and
yep.
repurposed for like those internet salesman types that you see all the time. But I do think it's worth reading, and I agree that with your statement that it's not about sort of damnation and sort of your eternal self, but more just about sort of this dichotomy between sort of a purposeless, sort of unguided life versus having some drive and trying to accomplish something and establishing goals and sort of moving through your day to day life with a purpose. I would rate it probably a 6.5 out of 10. I agree. I enjoyed the fact that it was short. We're around the holidays between Thanksgiving and Christmas. I think I finished this on about 3 dog walks, which made it nice to be able to listen to. And I know I recommended the audiobook as I was sort of recommended the book, was also told the audiobook was quite um, how do I say,
Mm-hmm.
dramatic with the voice changes between the two. The non-annotated version, the voices are better. I will say that. So if you have a choice between the annotated version and the non-annotated, if you want a little more drama, go with the non-annotated version, because I would flip back and forth between the two, and I found the one to be a little more entertaining. So with that being said, let's take a peek at what we're going to read next month. So for the month of January, and get this to pop up. There we go. All right, I made it Christmas colored.
Very nice.
All right, so we have the same books as last time. So Origin by Dan Brown, Pay as You Go, Book of Joy, Lonesome Dove, which is sort of seeing a renaissance now after being written in the 80s. Ship of Theseus, and Same Bed, Different Dreams. So let's give a spin.
Ooh, a light one. Dan Brown.
It looks like we got one of yours.
Honestly, this would be a quick read. I love Dan books. I had gotten the new one. Now I can't remember what the name of it. Something about Secret or something. But I think that this one came out right before it, and I don't know if I just missed it. So
Have you started this book yet? I think you
I
mentioned it
started
once
the
before.
newest one, and then I was like, I feel like maybe I've missed a little piece. And I saw that Origin was out. I saw that the publication date was within the last few years, and so I thought, okay, I better back it up and read this one before. Yep, I'm gonna get his book there. And then does that mean that I've got to pick the AI book?
Well, you can pick an AI book, or you can
Yeah.
pick whatever. I have a
Well, I've
list
got
of
an
AI
AI
books
book
to
here.
add to this
I'm
list.
not going to pick it, but I'm just reading it a couple here. If anyone builds it, everyone dies. Why superhuman AI would kill us all. Oh, have you?
I've read that, and I
Oh,
recommended it to a friend
yeah.
at work,
Is it
and it's
good?
crazy.
Yeah, maybe. Uh,
Yeah, if you
no,
want to read
send me
that
your
one, I'm
list.
down to
I'll look at
read
it.
it again.
I'll look at what you got here. But yeah, I really think this is more and more relevant. So it'll be nice to do something that's
Yeah.
just for fun, page turner. And
Hmm.
have you read all the other like Dan Brown books? Are you into that or?
I have read the Da Vinci Code. I think
Okay.
that's all I've read, because that became really popular when
Yeah.
we were in high school, and that was sort of my reading uh,
Yeah.
like pinnacle. I read so
Yeah.
much in high school, and then took like a 10-year hiatus and just started reading again, like the start of
Yeah.
COVID. Trying to get back into reading with this, which I thoroughly enjoy. But yeah, we should. Yeah, this one should be quick, so we can talk sometime in January.
One of one of his like early books is called Digital Fortress, and I feel like it's even more relevant today. So if you do end up liking this in his style, a Digital Fortress is a great one.
Sounds good. But yeah, let me know what you're thinking about adding, and I'll add it to the wheel. And also, let me know if you want to go to 8 books or just keep it at keep.
Add more books, more chances on the wheel. Cool.
Yeah, like each
Yeah.
of us have 4, so
Cool.
we can talk about it.
All right. Take it, bud.
All right. All right. Have a good rest of the day. See ya.